Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us for Righting the Wrongs in Walk-in Cold Room Equipment Sizing. I'm Amy Washko, your event moderator and marketing leader for Trane Technologies Life Science Solutions business, FARRAR. I'm joined today by our speaker, Nathan Vries, whom I'll tell you more about in just a minute, as well as Scott Masella. Scott's our Life Science Solutions portfolio leader, and he'll be facilitating our Q&A session. All attendees have been placed in listen-only mode. This presentation will be recorded and is best viewed using the GoToWebinar software for PC or Mac, or by using the GoToWebinar app on a smartphone or tablet. If you have technical difficulties, please send a message in the chat window and we'll attempt to troubleshoot your issue. During this presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask our subject matter expert questions using the question window in GoToWebinar. And once the presentation has concluded, our speaker will be answering your questions live in a session. But first, let me share a little background on our presenter today. Nathan Vries has over 20 years of experience in mechanical engineering, 16 of which have specifically focused on refrigeration solutions. From design to engineering to installation to service, he's performed and managed all aspects of the business, giving him unique insight and understanding of the intricacies required to deliver walk-in cold room solutions to life science customers. He currently serves as Senior Applications Engineer for FARRAR. I'll now turn it over to Nate to begin our presentation.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Amy, for the introduction. Thanks for joining our meeting on righting the wrongs in walk-in cold room sizing. So going over today's agenda quickly, we'll cover a little bit about who we are as Trane Technologies. We're going to go through both product and customer challenges and facility impacts, as well as refrigerants. So Trane Technologies is a global business with over 150 years experience. We're a large publicly traded company. On the stock ticker is TT. Our brands that you've heard of are Trane commercial and residential equipment, both Thermo King transportation, and now our newest brand, FARRAR, which includes a life science focused reach-in and walk-in freezers and cold storage. We have 34 manufacturing facilities throughout the world, over 36,000 employees. We do $13,000 in revenue annually, except our last stock report for last year will show almost 16,000. So we are growing and expanding. One of our core company focuses has been both the environmental, social, and governance of our company. We were doing this many years before it became vogue to do. I'm going to highlight a few key areas in my talk today. A big one would be being on the Dow Sustainability Index for 11 consecutive years, the longest of any HVAC manufacturer. We are a recognized industry leader by the CDP with an A rating, and Financial Times Climate Leader in 2021 with a note about our Gigaton Challenge, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So our 4 key areas of focus for sustainability throughout the heating and cooling market and life sciences is our latest solution that we're targeting. Trane is served in the healthcare market through HVAC commercial and transport through Thermo King for years, but we've noticed that we could support our customers even more with their facilities through precision environmental solutions beyond comfort, cooling, and chillers. That's why we've created our latest brand, FARRAR, which we'll be talking about today, and we'll be describing our offerings in detail. So as FARRAR, we have 2 divisions. Our low temp modular solutions that are forced air convection that you offer unique value prop and performance over a typical ULT solution. Then we'll talk about our walk-in today, which are, I won't want to limit to low temperature cold rooms because we'll go all the way from incubation through 4C all the way down to -55. We offer both the reach-in and walk-in solutions. It can be tied together or standalone to tailor whatever the customer needs. So to give a little more detail on how we support the pharma cold chain, is we start from right with manufacturing, from research and operations. We offer a wide range of bulk freezing and temperature storage, supporting both drug discovery, drug substance, and API manufacturing. Once that's complete and materials need to be transported, that's where our Thermo King product line will step in, and we can offer transport refrigeration without needs of items such as dry ice for transport. Our FARRAR solutions also provide ideal storage for materials that need precise environmental conditions after that process for fill and finish. Finally, across all areas, our commercial HVAC can support needs and from comfort cooling and chilled water solutions. And then we can also provide an extensive monitoring solution to make sure everything is running exactly as it's supposed to and prevent downtime. So at this point, we'll ask some polling questions to see what the pulse is of some of the attendees on what you have issue with the customer. You could take a couple minutes to answer the questions, and then we can kind of continue and dive into those.
Hey, Nate, it looks like we have about, it's close neck and neck between vague scope and unknown product and or workflow requirements. So one's 48%, one's 45%.
Sounds like we're right on the mark for the most problematic children. So it sounds like, based on the polling, that vague specifications and the excuse me, product flow is our highest priority, which ties kind of to the product challenges we're going to talk about, which is one of the ones that ties to kind of both of those is customers don't always, let alone know what they want, especially need. So they know they might need a box that's at 4C, but they don't tie in that information. So our biggest challenge and what we focus on with the clients is pushing to drill down into their workflows and what we're doing. So it requires a little annoyance with the customer. You have to ask a lot of questions, but it's what's necessary in order to deliver an accurate product that's going to do everything that client needs. Next slide, please. So in kind of drilling down into that uncertain customer, a lot of times, depending on their storage needs, sizing, their handling of that product, and time and temperature requirements, that's where we have to have a serious discussion about walk-in versus reach-in. That workflow understanding on how they're processing, what they're processing, bottle type, racking, etc., is all going to make a drastic change in what they do. We in many cases have had changes where they say one thing, It's going to be storage only, and then they move into something where they're actually using it as more of a process to draw down temperature on another product. And this is where we want to think about asking the right questions in terms of what are they going to do? Is there a growth potential for the operation of that machine? Is it going to be fixed? You know, this is all it's ever going to see. So basically, the highlight is always going to be asking those questions, getting that workflow understanding, what we're doing, and requirements. So once you've established a baseline, then you have to look at the building itself and what we're dealing with. So whether you're doing a ground up or an existing retrofit, that's where you have multiple design restrictions, both on available HVAC to handle if local refrigeration, if you're doing it. Also looking at trying to essentially shoehorn in where they need it and get enough space for them. A lot of times, due to ancillary space around, that can also cause issues because the condition of the surrounding area needs to be accounted for, which sometimes can be overlooked. So that's where we start talking about methods of heat rejection, what type of systems the client can utilize. That's where our portfolio comes in handy because we offer a water-cooled solution in almost every application we have. This is where, you know, utility considerations, if they have a plant on site, all that can become, you know, a viable option to reject heat. In terms of adjacent space considerations, retrofits are usually the most problematic with that. That's where the water cooling is a good option, and our chillers can help out in that situation. Next slide. So just a quick perspective on kind of temperature ranges and the importance of keeping it cold, and also the cost as that product increases as the temperature falls. One of the things I try to talk about with the customers is kind of what I consider to be the 4 pillars when we're considering their systems. So you want to think about, one, always efficiency or sustainability. Then you're going to look at durability. Then you're going to look at longevity, and then you're going to look at cost. I try to always push forward with the customer. Cost is always a consideration, but we need to make sure we remember how important the cold room is to all these processes. And it needs to be factored in, but we need to look at, you know, sustainability, efficiency of these systems to make sure they're running trouble-free. Excuse me. You know, life science encompasses a lot of temp ranges and storage needs. We're mostly focused on biologistics, including blood, tissue, DNA, plasma, vaccines, genetic samples. In general, these refrigerated temperatures, walk-ins are made from about 8C to -60. We can do interconnected -70, -80 storage that can be applied as both a reach-in or accessed by a controlled temp and humidity walk-in space. We always advocate for humidity conditioning in the adjacent spaces, as well as typically in any anteroom for our low temperature product. So now we're going to do a quick move over to refrigerants, and this ties right into our sustainability goals and the Gigaton Challenge, trying to reduce our global footprint. There are several refrigerants available to support small, medium, and large walk-ins. Unlike, you know, your reach-in plug-in refrigerator at home, these are large systems, large square footage, so they require a significantly higher charge. The regulations are constantly evolving, both with CARB in California, with the SNAP nationally, and those have to be taken into account. We always want to be pushing more towards the natural refrigerants because we're going to see that regulation continue to evolve, and we want to make that customer proactive and ensure that that solution is going to meet their need years in advance of what those regulations are going to be. So not all refrigerants are applicable for everything we need due to some of the conditions and issues. So when we talk about halocarbons that are in the phase out process, There are some viable options now. California has some more strict restrictions that are going to cause that to be a little bit of an issue. There are some in the process, some HFOs that are in process, but are unfortunately not approved yet, but they're working on it. Both the UL and ASHRAE are in the process of validating and approving that for charge weights and safety measures. Excuse me. We are pushing CO2 as a natural refrigerant that we are utilizing both from 4C all the way to -40. It's the most viable option and will conform to like California standards. So in terms of that selection, if we look at historical data, HFCs, HFOs have moved and started being in about 50% of the insulation. Then you've got ammonia, which has been kind of a niche market for larger industrial type applications, but has its challenges, which would be one, it's flammable, two, it's toxic. So it's not usable in a lot of applications in this market. CO2 is the newest, meaning 15 years new, but it's been around for a while. But we are moving towards that and using more controls and making it more viable and broader use across the business. It's used in larger installations, but we're tailoring it to smaller fixed systems. So when it comes to refrigerant challenges, Energy Star and low GWP are dominating. You see the push again to circle back with California's CARB regulations on pushing down their GWP ratings. So in the lower temp solutions, it's becoming more challenging. So tying to our systems, as we're moving towards, the reducing GWP and the greenhouse gas type effect, we're also looking at power consumption and the sustainability factor, and then also uptime, which is the most important thing for the customer. We want to be efficient, but we want to make sure that the system's running optimized all the time, and minimize downtime for these clients, as everything that lives within their spaces is critical. If your house air conditioning goes down, feels uncomfortable, but when you have a system that is keeping yellow fever vaccine, that's critical. That temperature has to maintain. We have to have redundancy, and we have to make sure that they don't feel anything when there is a problem. One of the key factors to this, in our experience, has been making sure we're connected to every system. So we are a big proponent of analytics and monitoring so that we provide a valuable service with trending, alarming, both cursory and emergency, to provide long, more advanced notice of critical issues. So instead of the typical way a lot of these plants run, somebody sees that the system went down, they see a temperature spike, they call. Our goal is to know that they've lost something. We've seen superheats out of range, we see high discharge, and we send a guy before that ever has a chance to impact them or the product. The goal is it runs and they don't even know that it's there. It just keeps things at temperature. The benefit to analytics is you also are getting trending data that's giving you historical record. We've typically been requested by customers to utilize the monitoring system as a backup when they had a system failure of their own system for monitoring. It also helps us to cover the customer's operations and helps with that traffic item. So one of the big items that we have noticed with a lot of clients, we have over 200 connected systems. And when you come to these specs and RFPs showing that they're going to go into that box 4 times a day, as you circle back and use the data from the system, you see that they're actually in there, 4 times that quantity. And that's what's causing inconsistency in the chamber temperature. So it provides both a tailoring tool so we can adjust system parameters in order to help correct some of that, but it also lets you explain to the customer, understand how their behavior is impacting their product in an adverse way. So that sums it up for the presentation. I will toss it back over to Scott Masiella, and he will field any questions you have, and we can take a few minutes to answer anything and drill down into some of these topics.
Sure, thanks, Nate. I have a couple to start for you. The first is like from a best practice standpoint, what goes into the solution design process? Where would you start? How do you recommend observing do you recommend observing customers and their processes before you get into the details of the design? Kind of give an idea of where the best practices would be on starting to scope out a potential job.
Yeah, so that that starts from inception, depending on who's bringing it to our table. We focus on, again, the process especially. We will do a site visit if it's an active site that we're maybe remodeling or replacing some equipment. All the questions are going to be tailored exactly on that. So I need to know what's the entering temperature of the product, how much product is going in at that temperature, how much is in storage at temperature. And then we always want to, again, I touched on this briefly, but we want to pay attention to, are they going to grow, right? So are they going to, this is what they think they're doing today, this is their plan, but they're most likely going to add production to that. I don't know how many times, we've had somebody says, we're not going to put any more equipment in here, and then they add more stuff. So it's better to think ahead of time and cover that. And then we talk about racking, workflow, the entire process, because all those air disruptions, if they change racking around. So we want to be a partner hand in hand, making sure that the entire room design is covered. And then we'd start talking controls, redundancy. There's a myriad. We have a large questionnaire that starts the process, and then we do a drill down from there, because a lot of times those questions tease out even more information that the customer didn't even know to provide.
Okay. And the next few are kind of circled around like the way you describe some of the design process. So why is dehumidification important? And then if we don't use it in our designs, what could happen, or what disadvantages would there be?
Yeah, so humidity is always an issue, especially when you fall to the lower temperatures. We always suggest addressing the ancillary spaces around these cold chambers and working with the mechanical engineer doing the HVAC system to make sure that they're accounting for it to keep it under a threshold. Then we usually suggest an anteroom or cooler that will be also dehumidified. And what we're trying to reduce is infiltration load into the cold box, into the freezer, and make sure that we can reduce the load on that system. One of the biggest complaints, especially in like -40 and below temperatures, is frost accumulation and buildup, both on the ceiling, throughout the box. And that's all related to traffic infiltration. So this is where making sure, one, we're drying that space out as much as we can to reduce that vapor pressure, and then also looking at the customer behavior and ensuring that traffic is accurate so we can account for that. That's going to both do less stress on the system. You're going to have less maintenance by local staff having to, clean up or scrape any frost, and both maintenance or service calls due to issues with that frost.
And is that something that typically is monitored? Are you monitoring the humidity as well?
So we always are in our if you call it an antechamber or cold box in front of your freezer system, we'll always want to see humidity just so we can make sure what's happening. We'll want to monitor it in the outside space as well, because all those, when you put that back to analytics, again, this is where you can show the path of how that customer behavior impacts the system, and it helps kind of train that customer, to follow their own SOPs.
Okay. And another one is, what are the disadvantages of CO2 over other higher GWP refrigerants? We know the advantages from the sustainability, but what needs to be considered?
So CO2 has been around for quite some time. Being that we need to be always pushing towards a low GWP and a greener solution, it has come to the forefront. The regulations now are tightening up and are accelerating in their tightening. So we are pushing that more and more. Now, CO2 has some challenges when it comes to southern climates and high temperatures. So we do have to use a water source in order to provide to provide enough cooling for our system. Because above 80, the systems start to lose efficiency. So we have to use economizers, adiabatic coolers, or a cooling tower, depending on size and type of system. Those will all be considered based on size. And so high temperature climates make it harder to use that system, but in a northern tier, it's much more palatable and a little bit user friendly. And again, with a GWP of 0, it's the best you can get in terms of footprint.
Is there a large trade-off with energy consumption?
There is some. If you were to compare it to, say, ammonia, it's not going to be comparable. There is a slight deficiency, but with technology over time, we're making some strides. So we'll continue to push, but you do get a slight trade-off. But that comes again at the regulatory level. So we're reducing our greenhouse footprint, but yet we're using slightly more energy. So it's a little bit of a trade-off.
Okay. And last one on the refrigerant, I promise. If there's sustainability goals, if the customer has sustainability goals and they need a space to be colder than -60, is there a sustainable refrigerant for a walk-in space today? And if not, do you have any insight on where it might be going?
So unfortunately, no. So once we get down into that -60 range, that's where we're going to be cascading and utilizing 508B, which is has a very high GWP. There isn't a viable option in that temperature range yet, but there's stuff in the works. All the manufacturers are looking to options, but that's not on deck yet. All the way down to -40, you can utilize CO2 pretty readily. There's some pressure challenges going lower than that, but it will provide for the largest part of the market, we'll be able to utilize CO2.
Okay, that's great. And talk a little bit more about controller options and what key questions should be answered in order to choose the right one for a particular application.
So a lot of that comes down to a customer preference when you're talking facility. So a lot of facilities will already have an existing standing system on site that they want to be able to tie to and see by their own internal maintenance staff, whether that's Allen Bradley or Siemens or another PLC. That will be the solution. Also, budget is going to do it, as well as the features needed and required. So for slightly simpler systems, you can go to a solid state controller that can still provide us some telemetry that we can still see. So we're going to get some pressures, temperatures, some information off the system. That also reduces the number of touches technicians have to have because they've got data in front of them, and the less we have them connecting, the better. And then we can go all the way to a completely tailored system, whether it be Allen Bradley or another PLC, and we can monitor every point that the customer desires. I mean, it's truly unlimited.
Okay. What recommendations for finishes other than stainless steel would you have in a space, and what type of concerns with non-stainless steel would you have, or even with stainless, that should be considered as you're building out a box or designing a box?
Yeah, so when you're talking finish, a lot of times it's preference. The biggest concern is cleaning substances, things that are using. So because these processes having to use antivirals, microbials, they are having to use sometimes a harsher chemical. So we need to validate what they're using to make sure what the standard is. there are other finishes such as SaniSteel, which provides a multi-layered finish. It is quite durable, a lot lower cost than a stainless that resists most of those chemicals. Now, there's also grades of stainless, so there's a lot of variability, and it's all based on what the customer is using it for and what they're cleaning. The cleaning is the biggest thing because those corrosive agents.
Okay. And then what concerns would you have if a customer wants to reuse a box instead of building out a new one?
So over time, the box does deteriorate. So the insulation within inside does deteriorate. You lose some of the R value. So that's an immediate concern when you're talking about efficiencies and infiltration. Then you need to look at seams. I mean, how that box has lived its life, how is it assembled? All those things start to play a part. And if we have, seams starting to leak, you're showing exterior, frost on the box somewhere, that thing is deteriorated and would need to be replaced. In some cases, low use box, low traffic, it could stand much longer, and equipment replacement would be a viable option.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit more about what's included in predictive and emergency maintenance services? Like what, and from that perspective, I think it's probably important to talk about what should be going into the box design and the refrigeration design for sensors that will help drive that.
Yeah, again, space criticality, redundancy, all those things are going to play a part in how we select what points to look at, as well as just the overall design. So if we have inaccessible equipment that's not visible, having CT sensors on evaporator motors so that we know when there's a failure is a big item. The system itself can be set up and tailored, all the alarming, to whatever we really want to do. So we can have like a class 1 alarm, which is going to be an emergency, which would be kind of the same alarm that you'd get if you were just standing on site. The temperature's climbing. We can do, a large piece of equipment failure, a few major, or what we call catastrophic alarms. Then you can go to a class 2 alarm, which you're going to see as more of a cursory alarm. So it says something's out of sorts or out of place. We need to go get a technician out there immediately to look at it, and that can be sent out as a reasonable timing. It doesn't have to be an emergency. And then we can do more background alarms, which are more about efficiency and performance, which are going to be even more multi-state alarms that are looking at multiple points on the system in concert to identify when we're losing something, when we've got an issue, something's out of whack.
Okay. And another question is, what does the engineering team do, and how do they typically interact with an installation contractor? So kind of, I think the way I would interpret this question is more along the lines of, when does the engineering team get involved, and what type of what do they typically deliver to an installation contractor, and how do they interact? What does that look like?
So I guess it's a little muddy, but so from the moment we start interaction with the customer and we get our initial questions asked, that's where we start drilling down, and they're already engaged. So we're looking at doing a rough layout, validating all the questions, making sure we have all the data required. That's when we're going to start the rough design. We'll ask the customer our follow-up questions based on everything we've got, and once we've done an initial layout, once that has been corrected, we do the final, we'll call it design, budgetary design, and then bring that to the customer. Once it moves to a job in process, we provide full drawings, full submittals. We have a superintendent that will go out and look at every project and manage each project so that we know that it's going to meet the standards that both we want to live up to as well as the customer expects. Engineering is there in support the entire time. So, we have all hands on deck on every project.
Okay. And the final question I have is, when do you think the best time to engage a vendor, like for our, when you're starting to plan a walk-in room or renovation or a new build?
Well, the earlier the better, and that's so we can have those in-depth discussions with the customer. We all know that everybody's busy. One of the challenges with a lot of this customer base is you have multiple parties within each company, and they all have different goals. So you'll have a quality piece, a team that's looking at quality. You have an ops piece. You might have production personnel, as well as like their internal engineering personnel. So everybody's got different goals. And so it takes a while sometimes to pull them all together to get all those questions. So you're actually drilling down to what they need and consolidating that data. So we end up having to be the filter, we'll call it, for all those parties to come up with a single solution.
Okay, and that's all the question we have today.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Scott, and thank you to all attendees for joining today. You're going to receive a brief survey, and all feedback for improvement is certainly appreciated. And a recording of this presentation will be available on our website by the middle of next week. As a reminder, links to past webinars can be found on the site, and we hope you'll join us for a future event.